I hear someone share a point and it's not correct, or it is leading people down a bad road, I get fired up.
And that would be the ultimate end of anger, right? Is murder. And that's where we have that's why God is talking about tempering our anger and don't sin, because that sin can easily lead to something as bad as murder.
Indeed. Your new self, by the way, that applies to all of us. Our new selves, it is who you are.
Yeah, it's a
in
part
Christ.
of you.
Yeah.
Yep.
God is making up the difference for you, because when he looks at you, he sees Jesus. He sees Jesus.
It was that moment, I'll never forget it, that I realized, no, just because my parents go to church or whatever's going on, there has to be something that happens personally between me and Christ.
Welcome back to the Life and Faith podcast. Happy to be back with you again. We have more than 50 episodes now, man.
Yeah, it's hard to believe. I saw the one we just uploaded as of the day of recording this. This past week was our 10th episode of this season, season 2.
Season, yeah.
And that's incredible. I feel like we just started season 2, but already having 10 episodes.
Yeah, it's great. And we had a lot of help from Cody, and we just we appreciated his input. Josh, I have a question for you. What makes you angry? What just really makes you angry?
What makes me angry? This may be too philosophical here, but I would say a lot of times what makes me angry the most are things that I probably struggle with internally a lot, and so it just makes me more sensitive to those things, right? So I'm sure you're looking for an actual example, though. So I think looking around at injustices, specifically injustices that involve innocent people, whether it involves children, that we've talked about this a lot of episodes, but the unborn.
Well, that's a great point, and I think that's more of on a large scale. What would you say? Small scale, day to day.
Oh man, small nitpicks. Is that
yeah,
what you're looking for?
Like nitpicky things.
Yeah,
things that you see or things you experience, like I
get angry just driving down the road sometimes.
Other drivers,
sure.
There's a great
other
one.
drivers,
yeah, especially in this state.
There's some people that when they get anxious in traffic, they slow down, and when I get anxious, I speed up and try to get as far away from people as possible.
How do you? I'll say what makes me angry would be. That's a good question. I think technology makes me angry. People depending on technology so much makes me angry. Situations.
This is ironic for what you do for a living.
Yeah. Situations I can't control make me angry. But sometimes depending on what they are. There's a lot. I mean, I really struggle. I would say raising a teenager. I get lots of opportunity to be angry, and it happens. On a weekly basis at the very least. And your kids aren't teens, but buddy. May you be blessed.
Yeah. I was a teenager once. So,
yeah. Well, you'll find out.
I can remember it.
Yeah, especially like these days, But how would you say that you deal with it? What do you do? Like, what do you do what's your go-to?
I mean, there's two ways of dealing with it. You can deal with it in your flesh, and you can deal with it in the spirit. I can tell you what I don't do sometimes is pray about it, give it to God. That's what I should do. You can bottle it up. Some people bottle it up, and that can be dangerous because it's going to explode at some point. But yeah, I think even just stopping to take the time and say, what am I thankful for? That can be a big deal too, because gratitude can produce a joyfulness in your heart. So a lot of times I've heard somebody, I had a former pastor that, a dear friend of mine, and I love so much how he puts it into perspective, but he's talking about himself, and he says, sometimes I'll stop myself and say, and he says his own name, and he says, what do you have to be frustrated about today?
Mm-hmm.
Like he realizes how frustrated he is at a situation. He's like, in light of all this over here, what God's done, what God is doing today, and what He inevitably will do tomorrow, I don't have any reason to be frustrated.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What about with your family members? Like when you're angry at one of maybe your wife or your kids, what do you do? How do you deal with it? Say one of them just like it won't get out of the way when you're trying to watch a game or something. How do you deal with it? Or maybe your wife, like, you get into an argument about something and you're angry. How do you guys?
Yeah.
Moment to moment, not maybe in the grand sense, but.
Well, man, in a marriage, there was a good example. I actually wanted to bring this up in another episode, but we were already short on time. In a marriage dynamic, and I'm saying this because this is what I do personally sometimes too, but as husbands, sometimes to avoid a conflict or a conflict escalating, we can sometimes we'll just walk away.
Mm-hmm.
And I've seen a lot of marriage-minded experts talk about this, that men avoid conflict or they walk away from a heated situation really out of care and concern for that person they're with. They're like, I care about this person, love them too much to let the feelings that are welling up in me explode all over them. So I'm going to remove myself from the situation out of concern for them. What comes into conflict there, though, is women view talking and seeing a person's face and sharing those problems and working them out as a form of, you're loving me by doing this.
Mm-hmm.
And when you walk away, you're refusing to do those things they so desperately want you to do. So I think even there, like you say, I need a moment, and it comes with grace on both of your parts, right? To say, like, I need a moment. And I'm saying this as an example. I've been guilty of doing this the wrong way, but the right way is for me to say, I need just a moment. I'm not walking away for good. Let's just table this for a little bit.
Right.
I'm going to even go pray about this, and I'm going to come back and hopefully be in a much better mindset.
Well, I've made the mistake so many times that I know when I'm getting to the point where I'm starting to not think clearly. And so I will do the same thing. I'll walk away.
Right.
I'll take a minute, let it calm down, figure out what to do, and try to hang it up on the clothesline and take a look at it from a few steps away and try to figure out what to do about the situation. Or I'll often say, like, to my wife, I'll say, I'm not angry at you, I'm angry at this situation, or whatever. And so I typically walk
Right.
away. That's typically what I do. Walk away, calm down,
That's
and
a
come
good
back
distinction. I'm angry. I've even said that before in the heat of the moment. I know this feels like I'm probably being angry or frustrated with you, but it's actually I'm just so frustrated with the situation. I love you, and I care about you. It's just we're kind of in a blast zone here.
Yeah, yep. What about with people? Okay, we talked about people you love. What about people you're called to love? How do you, like, say it's a fellow member or a non-believer, a fellow believer or a non-believer, and we were of course called to love. Do we love? Not always, but we're called to. So how do you, when you have those kinds of things, what's a moment to moment? Say, like with a stranger or something like that.
Yeah, I think if you've, I don't know, put your foot in your mouth, or there's some kind of conflict with another person, or say they start it, I think you looking past offenses, seeing the person, I think that's really key. To be able to step outside of the moment, which can be really difficult, but seek as much as you can, seeking to reconcile with that other person. Yeah, absolutely. Like, there's some people where you've made an effort to reconcile and they don't. I kind of shared this in another episode, but as long as you've made an effort to reconcile on your part and you've offered an apology and those things, the other person, your responsibility has been fulfilled there before God. So sometimes it's just a matter of continuing to pray for that person, letting them go in their way. Try to stay out of their way if you can. But even still, I would say, as a good note for Christians, even if you have people like that in your life, look for a way possibly down the road, even years later down the road, to be a blessing to them. Mm-hmm. Like, oh, there's this opportunity. I'm going to do that because there's some unresolved conflict here.
Yeah. Have you tried lashing out? I mean, that's it works
yes.
wonders.
Yeah. Well, I've gave an example of that in another episode, so I obviously do that.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
I mean, lashing out. I mean, it's the best,
Yeah.
especially with strangers.
Yeah. It's completely natural.
It's
right,
totally
Dan?
natural. Yeah. I shoved a guy at a concert one time for getting too close to my wife.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I'd do it again.
I mean, I'd say you're justified there with your wife.
Yeah. I'd do it again. A million years. Anyway, I'm just getting away from the point there. But anger, is not always wrong, right? It's weird how, like, the Bible says to let anger go away from you, right? And yet it also says to be angry, but don't sin, right? So
Right.
anger in itself is not wrong. It's not wrong to be angry. It's just like how, right? So a couple of verses for you. Ephesians 4:31, let all bitterness and wrath and anger and clamor and slander be put away from you along with all malice. So the word for anger there is the word arge, which means indignation. Okay, and Oxford, our good buddies at Oxford, they say that indignation is anger or annoyance provoked by what is perceived as unfair treatment.
Mm.
Okay, Webster says, anger aroused by something unjust, unworthy, or mean.
Yep. Justice and seeking justice or getting upset at injustice, that's hand in hand with anger.
Yeah. Yep. And it's because you perceived something as unfair, right? So that's kind of the basis of the anger. I've perceived this as unfair, and I'm not going to stand for it.
A lot of times what would not make us angry personally will make us angry when we take up offense for other people. There's a biblical principle of that, of being cautious against taking up offense. What normally you would let go, it's like, no, that's somebody I care about over there, and I'm going to get angry over that because I'm righteous in, at least you perceive it as, so I can do whatever I want on the basis that I'm just defending this person over here.
Yeah. Talking specifically about what makes me angry, one of the things that makes me really upset, I get really passionate about, is when people try to put bad theology in other people's heads. And I feel a sense. I was telling my pastor about this. I said, I don't feel like super called to be the gardener of the flower, right? I'm more like, I want to block the heavy rains. That I'm passionate about.
Would you say it's almost like you have a love for apologetics?
Well,
That's
it's not
more
just
of a
apologetics, but like
defense, right?
Yeah. But what I would say is, it is apologetics, holds hands with this. But I would say, if I hear someone share a point and it's not correct, or it is leading people down a bad road, I get fired up.
Yeah, it maybe falsehoods that's masquerading as truth,
right? Or
biblical truth.
Yeah. Or it's something that the world believes, but it isn't really biblical or whatever. And I go, oh, wait a minute. Oh, that it doesn't pass the test. I can tell you that. And then I get fired up, and then I get a little excited. And my wife tells me that I need to calm down and let it ride, and and let it go. And she's right at least 70% of the time. Anyway. So, going on here, Galatians 5. Now, the deeds of the flesh are evident, which are, among other things, immorality, impurity, sensuality, outbursts, outbursts of anger and disputes. Outbursts of anger is a phrase that we have translated into outbursts of anger. 3 words translated for 1 word, thymos, which means passionate outbursts, right? Impulses and outbursts, right? It's a plural idea. It is a work of the flesh to have outbursts of anger. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
Colossians 3, put them all aside. All anger, wrath, malice, slander, and abusive speech from your mouth. Put it aside, right? James 1:19, this you know, my beloved brethren, but everyone must be quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger, for the arge aner, the anger of man, does not achieve the righteousness of God.
Yep.
I had a hard time finding this verse.
It almost it has the sense of it directly opposes it. So, yeah.
180 degrees from right? Yeah. I had a hard time finding this verse because I couldn't find the translation because it was from the NIV 85, which is the one that I read when I got saved, and then NIV like wiped the 85 version off the face of the earth. Apparently, you can't hardly. I had to dig and dig and dig to find it. Turns out I was like, I know where this verse is coming from, but I couldn't remember, and then it was on my bookshelf the whole time. That verse 20, the way that James 1 and verse 20 is translated in the NIV 85 is my favorite way of saying it, and I say it a lot, is, for man's anger does not bring about the righteous life that God desires.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I love that because there's a life that he desires, and man's anger is not the path. Right. But then you come to Ephesians 4, and it says, be angry, and yet do not sin. Do not let the sun go down on your anger. That word for anger there is parorgismos, which means indignation, wrath, or exasperation. Perceive things as unfair treatment, rightfully, and you can even be angry about them, but don't let the sun go down on it, right? In other words, solve it, or don't let it be so important to you that it costs you in the next verse. I'm going to talk about the next verse in a second. That comes from Ephesians 4. Okay, and this is from gotquestions.org. It's just a summary of what Ephesians 4, or what Ephesians itself is all about, the book of Ephesians. I'm just going to read this quick summary of that, of what that book is, the purpose of that writing. So, Paul, writing from a Roman prison, intended that all who long for Christ-like maturity would receive this writing. Enclosed within the book of Ephesians is the discipline needed to develop into true children of God. Furthermore, a study in Ephesians will help to fortify and to establish the believer so he can fulfill the purpose and calling God has given. The aim of this epistle is to confirm and equip a maturing church. It presents a balanced view of the body of Christ and its importance in God's economy. Okay?
Yeah, so, God, I love that term, God's economy. I've said this before, but operating on God's economy versus man's economy is huge. What encompasses a lot of man's economy today is likes, followers, subscribers. That's all great, but it's not an indication of whether or not you're doing something right. So yeah, I think that's absolutely an element here, is working on God's economy, because that helps us formulate. You had an earlier episode that you came up with, Dan, about how to deal with your enemies the right way, essentially, and that's huge. David was operating on God's economy versus his own, which could have been, well, he's tried to kill you, you can kill him, but and that would be the ultimate end of anger, right? Is murder. And that's where we have that's why God is talking about tempering our anger and don't sin, because that sin can easily lead to something as bad as murder.
Indeed. Yeah, it's like you're going down that road. It's a dangerous road to walk. How far down are you going? Well, maybe you don't murder, but maybe you take something from, or you destroy something that doesn't belong to you, or whatever. You know what I mean? Maybe you took that a little far. Yeah. So Paul writes Ephesians, and he says these words, and the reason I bring up the summary of Ephesians is because I like to say, when I know that Scripture is written for us, and it's maybe written for us, but maybe not to us. You know, I recoil when people use Old Testament verses where God is speaking specifically to the Israelites and say, "See, he's saying that to us." And I go, I don't know about that. I mean, you're supposed to learn something from it, but let us not think that he's saying, "Dear 21st century American church." So I try to preface this statement that I'm about to make with whether or not this actually applies to us. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I was going to try to look it up real quick, but I don't think I can do it that fast. There's a verse even that says, the things that were written aforetime were written for our learning. So that kind of just backs up your point. Like, rather than it being written to us and addressed to us, like, you were reading Ephesians earlier. It was to the Ephesians, but it was recorded forever in the Bible and preserved for our learning.
Yeah.
So it may be to all these different people, but yeah, it's for us.
And in many cases, the facts that are true about them or the facts that are true about God are true about us. Like when we read in Thessalonians and he's talking about faithful living in spite of persecution, you know, he wasn't writing that to us, but hey, we are in a time of faithful living despite the world around us, despite, you know, persecution, maybe with a lowercase p instead of a capital P like they were experiencing, but a persecution all the same, right? How do we contend against the world in this situation? Well, Ephesians will say, Thessalonians will talk about Paul loving the Thessalonian believers and what things he was concerned with regarding them and everything like that. So anyway, all that to say, when you read Ephesians, there are some truths that can come out of that do apply to us. So I'll start with verse 17 in chapter 4. He says, "So this I say and affirm together with the Lord, that you walk no longer just as the Gentiles also walk, in the futility of their mind, being darkened in their understanding, excluded from the life of God because of the ignorance that is in them, because of the hardness of their heart." So he's saying, don't do it the way that you did when you were an unbeliever, right? Don't do it when you were regarded as there's Israel, the Gentiles, and then there's believers, right? It's like separated from them. Don't walk as they did. In other words, don't live under that same attitude or that same heart attitude of hardness, right? And they, having become callous, have given themselves over to sensuality, for the practice of every kind of impurity with greediness. But you did not learn Christ in this way. And you and I did not learn Christ in that way.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yep. It's not the example he set.
Not the example, right? Verse 21, "If indeed you have heard him and have been taught in him, just as truth is in Jesus, that, in reference to your former manner of life, you lay aside the old self, which is being corrupted in accordance with the lusts of deceit." You lay that aside. And verse 23, "And that you be renewed in the spirit of your mind. Put on the new self, which is in the likeness of God, and has been created in righteousness and holiness of the truth." Your new self, by the way, that applies to all of us. Our new selves are not just a 55-pound dumbbell that we sling up over our heads with all of our effort and might.
Mm-hmm.
It is who you are.
Yeah, it's a part
Christ.
of you.
Yeah.
Yep. We have when we become believers in Christ, we have a duality, so to speak. There's the old self, but then there's the new creation. And
furthermore, that it is in the likeness of God, has been created in righteousness and holiness of the truth. That's not us doing it.
Right. Yeah. It's all him.
Right? It's all him. Verse 25, "Therefore, lay aside falsehood. Speak truth, each one of you with his neighbor. For we are members of one another." Right? And that's specifically talking about other believers, right? How we relate to each other. But I would contend that we ought to treat non-believers in the same fashion, right? The rules are different, but speaking the truth with them, okay, with gentleness, as we talked about earlier. Verse 26, "Be angry." Okay, that's going to happen. Like you talked about in the conflict episode, it's going to happen. Be angry, and yet do not sin. Do not let the sun go down on your anger, and do not give the devil an opportunity.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, be angry, okay? feel the injustice of of situations when it's right, but deal with it or decide that it's not worth dealing with.
Yeah. Bring your anger to the Lord. Tell God about why this is affecting you, and leave it at the foot of the cross, right?
Precisely. And in fact, I'm going to say that in just a second. That's so cool. It's so cool how we, you know. By the way, like you were talking about conflict and peacemaking, and I'm talking about anger, and it's like
God's just bringing it to a head.
Bringing it to us, yeah. Verse 28: He who steals must steal no longer, but rather he must labor, performing with his own hands what is good, so that he will have something to share with the one who has a need. So it's like he's talking about how we treat each other, right? If you steal, or if you've stolen, you've committed, like use your past or use the things that you struggle with to help those that are around you in the way. Like if you stole, if you took, create.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Say, hey, and that's what you'll often find is like you find that with recovering addicts. They often are pulled toward helping other addicts get into recovery, right? It's kind of that idea. Like if you struggle with that, go the opposite direction and use that as a testimony. And this is getting away from the anger point, but I want to say that he continues to say, let no, verse 29, unwholesome word proceed from your mouth, but only such a word as is good for the edification according to the need of the moment. Yeah.
That's a good one. That's needed.
So if he just said, if you stole, create. If you had unwholesome words, leave your mouth, which we all have done. But only such a word as is good for edification according to the need of the moment. So now you're saying, in the past, using my past as someone who speaks unwholesome words, use your words now for the edification. Right?
Yeah.
Take that and turn it around and say
that's such a beautiful example of the gospel because, take the example of Joseph and his brothers. They let him in captivity. They sold him into Egypt, right? But he said at the end of it all, when he reconciled with his brothers, he said, "Don't be afraid." He said, "What you meant for evil, God meant for good." Indeed. He said it was all part of His plan. And the beauty is when we come to Christ, He can take what was really our Achilles heel, the sin that just so easily beset us, and not only can we have victory over that sin, but we can help others have victory. Suddenly, the great victory that Satan and the flesh and the world was having in our lives with that stronghold, God removes that stronghold, breaks it down, and He comes in and He allows you to have such a testimony that you impact others. That's taking something that was meant as we were instruments for evil, and now through Christ we become instruments for righteousness. And man, that should make anybody excited just thinking about that.
Specifically, yeah, in the lane in which you struggled, or the lane in which was such a problem for you before.
Right.
You can be such a help to those people who are still struggling with it because, like I say, the addict thing is so easy because it's the easy one-to-one. But like, maybe you're the person who just speaks unwholesome words or whatever. And
gossip.
Gossip.
Yeah.
Or
gluttony. You help people overcome that kind of, eating, any kind of eating disorder. You could say both ends of the spectrum, but yeah.
Only such a word as is good for edification according to the need of the moment, so that it will give grace to those who hear. Right? It's like you talked about sharing grace.
Yeah, breathing grace into a situation.
Yes, that's what I meant to say.
Yep.
Don't grieve the Holy Spirit of God, by whom you are sealed for the day of redemption. Let all bitterness and wrath and anger and clamor and slander be put away from you, along with all malice. Be kind to one another, tender-hearted, forgiving each other, just as God in Christ also has forgiven you. Because He's forgiven you, in the same way, forgive others, right? And we could go into forgiveness, and that's perhaps a topic for another day. But what a message, right? What a way to deal with anger, like we talk about all the time. This word, this ancient and true word, having tools to help you get through life. 1 Peter 3. But even if you should suffer for the sake of righteousness, you're blessed. And don't fear the intimidation, and do not be troubled. Okay, so if I'm angry, I'm troubled, right? He's saying don't be troubled, right? It's like, have your confidence. Matthew 10:28, don't fear those who kill the body and who are unable to kill the soul, but fear him who is able to destroy both body and soul in hell, right? 2 Timothy, Paul's writing to Timothy, and he just says, for God did not give us a spirit of timidity, but of power and of love and of discipline.
Amen.
Yeah. The psalmist says, God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Right? Matthew 5, blessed are you when people insult you. Blessed are you when people insult you and persecute you and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward in heaven is great. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
It's like the evil of the world really isn't. It isn't really about you.
Right.
You know.
Yep. There's an agenda that's existed long before you existed.
Yeah. No kidding. So what is appropriate anger? If we're saying there's an anger that's not appropriate, there must be an appropriate anger. Well, in order to find that answer, I believe we need to look at what Jesus got angry about. And I'm going to say there's two things. Okay, two main things that I found. There may be more out there, but these are the two that I found. One was putting money as a barrier between people and the worship of their God. Because they were lining up in the court, and they were saying, pay this, and then you can go worship.
And it's twofold in that, too, because not only is it doing that thing, but what is it taking away from? It was taking away from what that synagogue should have been at the time, which is telling the Gentiles about the Jewish faith and about the God that they serve. Yet they weren't doing that. It was all about the money, like you're saying.
Yeah, putting money as a barrier between God and the people. You know,
right?
Not that God could be barriered, but you get what I'm saying.
Right. Yep.
Matthew 21 and verse 12, and Jesus entered the temple, and he drove out all those who were buying and selling in the temple and overturned the tables. And dropping down to verse 13, he said to them, it is written, my house will be called a house of prayer, but you are making it a robber's den. In verse 14, I love this. And the blind, and so he turns it over, he says that, and then he said, and the blind and the lame came to him in the temple, and he healed them.
Here's what we're supposed to be doing.
What to do next? The other thing he really despises, and I gotta say, I cannot agree more. I mean, we're just in lockstep on this one. Religious elitism. He gets angry about it.
Yeah.
Mark 3 and verse 2, they, the Pharisees, were watching him to see if he would heal him, the man with the withered hand, on the Sabbath, so that they might accuse him. And he said to the man with the withered hand, get up and come forward. And he said to the Pharisees, to them, is it lawful to do good or to do harm on the Sabbath, to save a life or to kill? But they kept silent.
Should you be doing that?
Verse 5, after looking around at them with anger, grieved at their hardness of heart. Again, he's grieved at their hardness of heart. Right? What is the problem? Is the hardness of heart, right? And he said to the man, stretch out your hand, and he stretched it out, and his hand was restored. So you see this model of like anger and healing. You know, it's like Peter's thing that you mentioned in another episode. He cuts off the ear of Malchus, right?
Yeah.
And what does Jesus do? How does he respond in anger? With healing. There's that model, anger and healing.
Anger tempts us to hurt others, either with our words or by our actions. The opposite of that gut instinct is to heal others.
To heal.
Either with our words or our actions.
Yeah, it definitely is not lost on me that healing follows all those instances of anger.
Yeah, that's good.
So what now? right? And that's another part about this podcast that I just love. We say like, okay, these are cool theories and everything. These are cool.
How does this apply to
These,
me?
these are cool theoretical things. Yeah, okay, up there in
Yep.
the ether, that's a good idea to be kind and forgiving and not to be angry about stuff and to just decide whether or not it's worth getting upset about or not. So what do we do? How should we deal with all the things for which we are angry? Well, I'll kind of end with this. It starts with understanding who has a right to be angry with whom. And I always go back to the Jonah, like the example of Jonah, right? And God said to him, did you make the Ninevites? Did you make the you know what I mean? Did you create, is this all yours, Jonah?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what does he ask him there?
Or was it Job? Am I mixing those stories? Job, he said, did you put the stars in heaven?
Yes, yeah, he comes to Job.
But Jonah, he says the same thing. Like, did you make the plant?
Yeah, yep, he says that about the gourd when the gourd withers.
Yeah, yep. Did you make it?
Yep.
Okay, who really has a right to be angry with who here, Jonah? You know.
I really like something that he says at the end, and I don't know if we need to go into this necessarily, but like Jonah, like if you and I were in the situation of Jonah, you know, our nation's enemy, so to speak, that has you know, massacred our people at some point, to go and you're. I think he says something to that effect at the end of Jonah, where he says, like, "Lord, I knew you were a gracious God. You know, I knew if I
knew you would relent."
Yeah, and he ultimately didn't want that, but yeah, and I think so. What I'm looking for, and I can't find it, but towards the end, he says, "Jonah, do you do well?" That's I'm paraphrasing a little bit. And he's like, "Yes, Lord, I do." Like he was that angry. He was like, "I am doing well by this." And, yeah. It's just it's comedic because we've all been there, right? We've all been there in our anger. We're like, yes, I'm justified in my anger. Of course, I have a right to be angry. You know.
Yeah. Probably 9 times out of 10 you don't. But
I relate with Jonah. You know,
Yeah.
I know we can be hard on him, but man, that would be tough.
It starts with understanding who has a right to be angry with who. It continues with the understanding that these problems are God's to solve. Romans 12 says, if your enemy's hungry, feed him. If he's thirsty, give him something to drink. For in so doing, you will heap burning coals on his head. I think I'm missing the order. I'm mixing up the order. As it is written, is that the next part?
Yeah, when it talks about heaping coals of fire on their head.
Yeah, no, I'm thinking of something else here. Hold on, let me just look it up real quick because I want to say it specifically how it's written because it's so cool. And I had this memorized at one point, and I thought I was going to be hot stuff and come in here and have it all memorized and be able to rattle it off, but it escapes me now. And I think it's because of nerves. But let me just grab this real quick.
You could edit this and be like,
oh, I will. I'll make it look like I'm super slick. Romans 12 and about midway down. Yeah. Okay. If possible, as far as it depends upon you, be at peace with all men. Verse 19, never take your... See, the problem is I wrote the wrong reference down on the page.
Okay.
Never take your own revenge, beloved, but leave room. These are God's problems to solve.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Never take your own revenge, but leave room for the wrath of God, for it is written, vengeance is mine.
Yeah.
I will repay.
Yep.
What is your job to do in the midst of it? If your enemy's hungry, feed him.
Yeah, and there's the part I was thinking of, the next part.
You know, and if he's thirsty, give him a drink, for in so doing you'll heap burning coals on his head. Don't be overcome by evil. Overcome evil with good.
Whew. Love that verse. That's so good for this. Yeah. All that stuff we were talking about in the other episode too, of the stuff that's going on, the evils in the world. That's the answer right there. We overcome evil with good, and God will fight for us.
Mm-hmm.
He really will.
It starts with understanding who has a right to be angry with whom. It continues with the understanding that these problems are God's problems to solve. And it ends at the foot of the cross where we lay it down, and ends upon his return. This is one of my most favorite verses in the whole Bible, Matthew 24:27. For just as the lightning comes from the east and flashes even to the west, so will the coming of the Son of Man be.
Yeah.
Revelation 1, behold, he's coming with the clouds, and every eye will see him. Even those who pierced him, and all the tribes of the earth will mourn over him. So it is to be. And toward the end of Revelation 22:12, he says, behold, I'm coming quickly, and my reward is with me to render to every man according to what he has done. So you see things in the world that make you angry. You feel like you want to be angry about something. Be angry for the right reasons. But remember that it's his world. It's his created universe. And he's got it all in his hand. And there's just no reason to let it drag you down, to let it make you be someone you're not, to let it, there's no reason to let it show the person you are. No, I just mean, it's like you don't let it drag you in.
Yeah, because you still have the old nature, but when anger gets the better of us, it's like, oh, that's who God saved you from. You don't have to be that way anymore. Yeah. Just being able to cast it at Jesus' feet, like you said, laid out at the cross, not bear that burden. His burden was intended to be light for you. And what a great topic. Thank you for listening to the Life and Faith podcast. If you've enjoyed today's episode, please consider subscribing, leaving a review on your favorite platform, and sharing it with friends and family. Your support helps us continue spreading the gospel of faith, hope, and love. Connect with us on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and many others to stay updated on our latest episodes. See the link in the show notes for all our social media channels. And until next time, it is our hope you'll commit yourself to an even deeper life and faith.